The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Maya Rodriguez pressed her back against the cold bathroom tiles. Her geometry textbook scattered across the wet floor like fallen leaves. 3 girls stood between her and the exit, their designer. Sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete. What had started as whispered threats in the hallway was about to become something much worse. But these bullies had no idea they were cornering the daughter of the most feared tactical officer in Cedar Falls. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest backup. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had been at Riverside High School for exactly 17 days when everything changed. Moving from Portland to Cedar Falls, Oregon had been her father's idea, a fresh start after his promotion to captain of the regional SWAT team. Captain David Rodriguez was the kind of man who commanded respect without raising his voice, whose presence could defuse a hostage situation or calm a panicked crowd. But Maya had inherited none of his commanding presence. She was small for her age, barely 5 feet 2 inches, with dark hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail and oversized sweaters that seemed to swallow her whole frame. The morning air in Cedar Falls carried the scent of pine and morning dew as Maya walked the 6 blocks from her modest 2-story house on Maple Street to Riverside High. Her father had offered to drive her, but Maya preferred the quiet walk. The time to steel herself for another day of navigating unfamiliar hallways and avoiding eye contact. The school building loomed before her, a sprawling complex of red brick and glass that housed nearly 1,200 students, most of whom had known each other since elementary school. Maya clutched her schedule in one hand and her worn backpack in the other as she pushed through the main entrance doors. The hallway buzzed with morning chatter, lockers slamming shut, and the shuffle of sneakers against polished floors. She kept her head down, focusing on the numbers printed above each classroom door, searching for room 204, where her first period English class would begin in 10 minutes. It was during this morning navigation that she first encountered Zoe Parker. Zoe stood at the center of a cluster of girls near the trophy cases, her blonde hair perfectly styled in loose waves that caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows. Everything about Zoe screamed confidence and privilege, from her expensive leather jacket to the designer bag, casually slung over her shoulder. She was the kind of girl who seemed to own whatever space she occupied, and at Riverside High, that space included most of the school. Maya tried to slip past unnoticed, but Zoe's sharp green eyes caught her movement. A perfectly manicured hand shot out to block Maya's path, and suddenly the cluster of girls had formed a semicircle around the new student. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked up into Zoe's face, noting the way the other girls' glossy lips curved into what might have been a smile if not for the coldness in her eyes. "Well, well," Zoe drawled, her voice carrying just loud enough for her followers to hear. "Look what we have here. Portland girl thinks she can just blend in, doesn't she?" The other girls giggled on cue, and Maya felt heat creep up her neck. She had hoped to remain invisible, to slide through her senior year without making waves or drawing attention. Clearly, that plan had already failed. "I'm just trying to get to class," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the hallway noise. She attempted to step around Zoe's outstretched arm, but Connor Mills, a tall boy with perfectly tousled brown hair and a varsity letterman jacket, had materialized beside Zoe like a loyal guard dog. "Class doesn't start for 8 minutes, Connor said, checking the expensive watch on his wrist with exaggerated precision. Plenty of time for introductions. His smile was all teeth and no warmth, the kind of expression that made Maya's stomach twist with unease. Ashley Wong, the third number of what Maya would later learn was Cedar Falls' most feared trio, stepped closer. Ashley was petite like Maya, but where Maya tried to disappear, Ashley commanded attention with her bold makeup and confident posture. "We like to welcome new students personally," Ashley said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Make sure they understand how things work around here." Maya glanced around the hallway, hoping to catch the eye of a teacher or administrator, anyone who might intervene. But the adults were either locked away in their offices or hadn't yet arrived for the day. The other students seemed to sense the tension and gave the group a wide berth, their eyes averted as they hurried past. Maya realized with growing dread that she was completely on her own. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just want to go to class and mind my own business." She attempted once more to move past them, but this time Zoe's hand pressed firmly against her shoulder, stopping her in place. "That's where you're wrong, Portland," Zoe said, her voice dropping to a more menacing tone. "See, when someone new comes to our school, it affects all of us. The social balance, the way things work. You can't just show up and think you don't have to pay your dues." The word dues hung in the air like a threat, and Maya felt her mouth go dry. The warning bell rang, echoing through the hallway with sharp electronic urgency. Students began moving more quickly toward their classrooms, and Maya saw her chance to escape. She ducked under Zoe's arm and hurried down the hall, her sneakers squeaking against the floor as she practically ran toward room 204. Behind her, she heard Zoe's laughter, cold and calculating. "See you around, Portland," Zoe called after her, the words carrying a promise that made Maya's skin crawl. Maya's first period English class passed in a blur of nervous energy and distracted thoughts. Mrs. Santos, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, attempted to engage the class in a discussion about symbolism in contemporary literature, but Maya found herself staring out the window at the soccer field beyond, her mind replaying the encounter in the hallway. When the bell rang to signal the end of first period, Maya gathered her books slowly, hoping to let the hallway clear before venturing out. Mrs. Santos noticed her hesitation and approached her desk with a concerned expression. "Everything all right, Maya?" the teacher asked gently. "I know starting at a new school can be overwhelming, especially this late in the semester." Maya looked up into Mrs. Santos' warm brown eyes and felt a moment of temptation to confide in her, to explain about the encounter with Zoe and her growing sense of unease. But her father's voice echoed in her mind, his frequent reminders that Rodriguez women were strong, that they handled their own problems and didn't rely on others to fight their battles. "I'm fine, Mrs. Santos," Maya said, forcing a smile. "Just trying to get used to everything." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't bring herself to admit how scared she already felt. The rest of the morning passed without incident. Maya managed to navigate to her remaining classes without crossing paths with Zoe and her friends, though she remained hyper-aware of every footstep in the hallway, every burst of laughter that might signal their approach. By the time lunch period arrived, Maya's shoulders ached from the constant tension. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cafeteria at Riverside High was a cavernous space filled with long tables and the constant din of teenage conversation. Maya purchased a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water, then surveyed the room for a place to sit. Most tables were already claimed by established groups, their invisible boundaries as clear as painted lines. Maya spotted an empty table near the back corner and made her way toward it, grateful for the chance to eat in relative solitude. She had just unwrapped her sandwich when a shadow fell across her table. Maya looked up to find Connor Mills standing over her, his hands resting on the back of the chair across from her. His letterman jacket bore the Riverside High Ravens logo, and Maya noticed the multiple pins indicating his participation in various sports and activities. "Mind if I sit?" Connor asked, though he was already pulling out the chair before Maya could respond. He settled himself across from her with the easy confidence of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. "Actually, I was hoping to eat alone," Maya said quietly, but Connor either didn't hear or chose to ignore her. "Words. Portland's an interesting city," Connor said conversationally, as if they were old friends catching up. "My family went there last summer for a vacation. Visited some breweries, toured the waterfront. Where exactly did you live?" Maya took a small bite of her sandwich, hoping Connor would lose interest and leave if she didn't engage. But his blue eyes remained fixed on her face, waiting for an answer with the persistence of a predator. "Southeast," Maya said finally, the word barely audible above the cafeteria noise. "Southeast Portland," Connor repeated, nodding slowly. "That's not exactly the nicest part of town, is it? What did your dad do there?" The question seemed casual, but Maya detected an undercurrent of something else, a probing quality that made her uncomfortable. "He was a police officer," Maya said, which was technically true, though it left out the specialized nature of his work with the tactical unit. Connor's eyebrows rose slightly. "A cop's kid, huh? That must have been interesting. I bet you know. All about following rules and staying out of trouble." There was something mocking in his tone, as if the idea of rule following amused him. Maya finished her sandwich in silence, hoping Connor would take the hint and leave. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and continued talking, sharing details about his family's construction business and their prominent position in Cedar Falls society. Maya learned that Connor's father owned the company responsible for most of the new development in town, including the shopping center where her mother had found work as a nurse at the urgent care clinic. "The Mills family has been in Cedar Falls for 3 generations, Connor said with obvious pride. "We basically built this town into what it is today. That kind of legacy comes with certain responsibilities and certain privileges." The way he emphasized the last word made Maya's skin crawl. When the lunch bell rang, Maya stood quickly and gathered her trash, eager to escape Connor's presence. But as she turned to leave, she found Zoe and Ashley blocking her path. They had approached silently while Connor kept her distracted, and now Maya was effectively trapped between the table and the 3 students. "How was lunch, Portland?" Zoe asked with mock concern. "I hope Connor was being a good host. We like to make sure our new students feel welcome." Her green eyes glittered with malicious amusement, and Maya realized this encounter had been planned. "I need to get to class," Maya said, her voice stronger than she felt. She tried to step around them, but Ashley moved to block her again. "Class doesn't start for 5 minutes, Ashley said, echoing Connor's words from that morning. "We were thinking maybe you could help us with something. You see, Connor here forgot to do his history homework last night. Big game coming up, you know how it is. We thought maybe someone smart like you could help him out." The request hit Maya like a physical blow. They wanted her to do Connor's homework, to become their academic servant. She thought about her father's lessons about standing up to bullies, about never letting people take advantage of your kindness. But she also thought about the 3 faces surrounding her, about how alone she was in this enormous school. "I can't do your homework for you," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's cheating." Zoe's expression hardened, the pretense of friendliness evaporating like morning mist. "That's funny, Portland, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you don't really have a choice. You see, Connor's family donates a lot of money to this school. Ashley's mom is on the school board, and my father just happens to be the biggest employer in town. We've got what you might call influence." Maya felt the walls closing in around her. The casual cruelty in Zoe's voice was more frightening than outright threats would have been. These weren't random bullies acting out of anger or frustration. They were calculating predators who had identified her as easy prey. "Think about it over the weekend," Zoe said, her smile returning but never reaching her eyes. "We'll talk more on Monday." Maybe somewhere more private where we won't be interrupted. She glanced meaningfully toward the bathroom doors at the far end of the cafeteria. As the trio walked away, leaving Maya standing alone by the empty table, she felt something cold and heavy settle in her stomach. The weekend stretched ahead of her like a countdown to execution, and she had no idea how to escape the trap that was slowly closing around her. What Maya didn't know was that 30 miles away, her father was leading a training exercise that would soon become relevant in ways she couldn't imagine. Captain David Rodriguez was teaching his team about the importance of patience, of gathering intelligence before acting, and of never underestimating an opponent based on appearances. Lessons that his daughter would desperately need in the days to come. Maya's weekend passed like a fever dream of anxiety and sleepless nights. Saturday morning found her sitting at the kitchen table, picking at a bowl of cereal while her mother, Carmen Rodriguez, bustled around preparing for her shift at the urgent care clinic. Carmen was a petite woman with the same dark hair as her daughter, but where Maya seemed to fold in on herself, Carmen moved with purposeful energy that filled whatever room she occupied. "You've been awfully quiet since school started," Carmen observed, pausing to study her daughter's pale face. "Everything going okay at Riverside?" She poured coffee into a travel mug, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen with its comforting scent. Maya forced a smile, the same brittle expression she had perfected over the past week. "Just adjusting, Mom. You know how it is." The lie came easier now, polished smooth by repetition. She couldn't tell her mother about Zoe and the others. Couldn't admit that she was already failing at the fresh start they had all hoped for. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the hallway, his presence immediately commanding attention even in casual weekend clothes. David Rodriguez stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and graying hair that he kept military short. Even off duty, he carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. His dark eyes, so similar to Maya's, took in the scene with the practiced assessment of a trained observer. "Morning, Nia," he said, dropping a kiss on top of Maya's head before moving to pour his own coffee. "Any plans for today?" His voice carried the slight accent that emerged when he was relaxed, a remnant of his childhood in a bilingual household. Maya shrugged, pushing soggy cereal around her bowl. "Probably just homework, maybe read for a while." The truth was, she had no idea how to fill the long hours until Monday morning arrived with its inevitable confrontation. David sat down across from his daughter, his keen eyes noting the tension in her shoulders and the way she avoided meeting his gaze. 20 years of police work had taught him to read people, and something about Maya's demeanor triggered his protective instincts. But he also knew his daughter well enough to recognize when she needed space to work through her problems. "Your Mom and I were thinking of driving up to the coast tomorrow," David said casually. "Cannon Beach has that tide pool area you used to love when you were little. Might be nice to explore somewhere new together." The invitation was gentle, an offering, rather than a demand. Maya looked up at her father's hopeful expression and felt a stab of guilt. Here he was, trying to help their family bond in their new home, while she sat paralyzed by fear of 3 teenagers, who probably wouldn't give her a second thought until Monday morning arrived. "That sounds nice, Dad," Maya said, and meant it. A day at the coast might be exactly what she needed to clear her head and figure out how to handle the situation at school. The weekend trip to Cannon Beach proved to be a temporary balm for Maya's frayed nerves. Walking along the wide expanse of sand with the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon, she felt some of the knots in her shoulders begin to loosen. Her parents walked hand in hand ahead of her, occasionally stopping to examine interesting shells or pieces of driftwood that had washed ashore. David had packed his camera and spent considerable time photographing the iconic haystack rock, its massive bulk rising from the sand like a monolithic sentinel. Maya found herself drawn to the tide pools that formed in the rocky areas marveling at the tiny ecosystems that thrived in the spaces between high and low tide. Sea anemones waved their tentacles in the shallow water while hermit crabs scuttled between patches of purple mussels and orange sea stars. "Look at this one," Carmen called out, pointing to a particularly large sea star clinging to the side of a barnacle-covered boulder. "It's beautiful how they can regenerate lost arms. Nature's way of healing from damage." Maya knelt beside her mother, watching the sea star's slow, deliberate movement. "How long does it take?" she asked. "For the arm to grow back completely?" "Months," Carmen replied. "Sometimes over a year, depending on how much was lost. But they don't give up. They just keep growing, one day at a time, until they're whole again." She glanced at her daughter meaningfully, as if sensing that Maya needed to hear those particular words. That evening, as they sat around a small campfire on the beach, David pulled out his guitar and played some of the folk songs that Maya remembered from her childhood. His rich baritone voice carried across the sand, mixing with the sound of waves and the occasional cry of seagulls settling in for the night. Maya felt more relaxed than she had since arriving in Cedar Falls, surrounded by her parents' love and the vast indifference of the ocean. But as Sunday evening approached and they drove back toward their new home, Maya felt the familiar knot of anxiety reform in her stomach. The weekend had been a wonderful respite, but it hadn't solved anything. Tomorrow morning would bring the same hallways, the same faces, and the same inevitable confrontation that Zoe had promised. Maya spent Sunday night lying awake, staring at the ceiling of her new bedroom and trying to imagine different scenarios for how the encounter might unfold. Maybe Zoe had been bluffing, just trying to scare her. Maybe the trio would lose interest and move on to easier targets. But deep in her gut, Maya knew that wishful thinking wouldn't change the reality she faced. At 3 a.m, she finally gave up on sleep and crept downstairs to the kitchen, hoping a glass of milk might help calm her nerves. She was surprised to find her father sitting at the table, still dressed in his tactical gear from what must have been a late night call-out. "Couldn't sleep either?" David asked softly, gesturing for Maya to join him at the table. His equipment belt lay on the counter nearby, radio still crackling occasionally with distant dispatcher chatter. Maya poured herself a glass of milk and sat down across from her father, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, deflecting attention from her own sleeplessness. David nodded, rubbing his temples with calloused fingers. "Domestic situation that went sideways. Nobody hurt, thank God, but it took 6 hours to resolve peacefully." He studied his daughter's face in the dim light from the stove. "What's keeping you up, Mia? And don't tell me it's just homework." Maya felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Something about the quiet intimacy of the kitchen at 3 a.m, combined with her father's gentle concern, made her want to confess everything. But the words stuck in her throat, trapped by her own stubborn pride and the fear that involving her parents would only make things worse. "Just anxiety about tomorrow," she said finally, which was true even if it wasn't the whole truth. "New school stuff, you know." David reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. That's what families do." Maya squeezed back, drawing strength from her father's steady presence. "I know, Dad. I just need to give it a little more time." She hoped that would be enough, that somehow she could find a way through the maze of intimidation and threats that awaited her at Riverside High. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that seemed to seep into your bones and settle there. Maya walked to school through the misty streets of Cedar Falls, her backpack heavy with books and the weight of impending confrontation. The familiar brick facade of Riverside High loomed through the morning fog like something out of a Gothic novel. The first few periods passed without incident, allowing Maya to nurture a fragile hope that perhaps Zoe had forgotten about her threats or decided to focus her attention elsewhere. But as the morning progressed, Maya began to notice things that made her skin crawl with unease. Zoe and her friends seemed to be everywhere she looked, appearing around corners with knowing smiles, whispering among themselves whenever Maya passed by. During third period chemistry, Maya found herself seated at a lab table directly behind Connor Mills. She tried to focus on the teacher's explanation of molecular bonding, but Connor kept turning around to make comments that only Maya could hear. "Hope you had a nice weekend, Portland," he murmured during a lull in the lecture. "We missed you around here. Zoe especially was asking about you." His blue eyes held a predatory gleam that made Maya's stomach churn. "Mr. Mills," called out Mrs. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, "perhaps you could share your thoughts on covalent bonds with the rest of the class since you seem so eager to talk." Connor flashed his most charming smile and smoothly launched into a textbook-perfect explanation of electron sharing. Earning approving nods from Mrs. Patterson, Maya realized with growing dread that Connor wasn't just a privileged bully. He was intelligent and calculating, which made him infinitely more dangerous. As the lunch period approached, Maya felt her anxiety reach a fever pitch. She had spent the morning meal break in the library for the past week, finding refuge among the dusty stacks and the stern but kind librarian, Mrs. Hoffman. Today, however, Maya discovered that the library was closed for maintenance, forcing her to venture into the social minefield of the cafeteria. Maya purchased a small salad and a bottle of water, scanning the crowded room for somewhere safe to sit. Most of the tables were occupied by established cliques, their invisible boundaries as impermeable as brick walls. She finally spotted an empty table near the windows overlooking the parking lot and made her way toward it, hoping to eat quickly and escape before anyone noticed her. She had just taken her first bite of lettuce when Ashley Wong slid into the seat across from her, followed immediately by Connor, who claimed the chair to her left. Maya's heart began hammering against her ribs as she realized they had cornered her again, this time with no easy avenue of escape. "Enjoying lunch, Portland?" Ashley asked with false sweetness, her dark eyes glittering with malicious amusement. She wore a cropped sweater that probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe, and her makeup was applied with the precision of someone who spent considerable time on her appearance. Maya set down her fork, her appetite vanishing completely. "What do you want?" she asked quietly, proud that her voice didn't shake despite the terror coursing through her veins. Connor leaned closer, his cologne overwhelming in the confined space. "We want to talk about that little favor we discussed. You've had the whole weekend to think about it. Have you come to the right conclusion?" Maya glanced around the cafeteria, hoping to catch the eye of a teacher or administrator, but the few adults present were either engaged in their own conversations or dealing with other student issues. She was effectively on her own, surrounded by hundreds of her peers who were all carefully avoiding looking in her direction. "I already told you," Maya said, her voice barely audible above the cafeteria noise. "I can't do your homework for you." "It's wrong." Ashley's perfectly glossed lips curved into a cold smile. "Wrong according to who? Your daddy the cop?" She said the last word with such disdain that Maya flinched as if she'd been slapped. "How did you?" Maya began, but Connor cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Cedar Falls is a small town, Portland. Word gets around about new residents, especially when they work in law enforcement. But here's the thing about small towns. They have their own rules, their own ways of doing things. And sometimes outsiders need help understanding how things work." Maya felt trapped between their expectant faces and the wall of windows behind her. The rain had intensified, creating rivulets that distorted her view of the parking lot beyond. She thought about her father's lessons on standing up to bullies, about never letting fear control your decisions. But she also thought about the isolation she had felt since arriving in Cedar Falls, the desperate loneliness of being completely friendless in a sea of hostile faces. "I need more time," Maya said finally, hating herself for the weakness in her voice. To think about it. Ashley and Connor exchanged a meaningful look, and Maya realized with growing horror that her hesitation had been interpreted as partial surrender. They smelled blood in the water now, and their predatory instincts were fully engaged. Times. Portland, Ashley said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than shouting would have been. Zoe's getting impatient. And when Zoe gets impatient, bad things happen to people who disappoint her. Connor nodded in agreement, his earlier charm completely evaporated. Meet us in the second-floor bathroom after 6th period. The one by the old gym that nobody uses anymore. We're going to have a little chat about your future at Riverside High. They stood simultaneously, leaving Maya alone at the table with her untouched salad and racing heart. As they walked away, Ashley turned back with one final comment that made Maya's blood run cold. Don't even think about skipping out early or getting a teacher involved. We'll know. And if you make this harder than it needs to be, we'll make sure everyone at this school knows exactly what kind of family you come from. Trust me, Portland, you don't want that kind of attention. The remainder of the day passed in a haze of barely controlled panic. Maya stumbled through her afternoon classes, unable to concentrate on lectures or assignments as her mind raced with increasingly desperate scenarios. She considered faking illness to go home early, but Ashley's warning echoed in her head. She thought about finding a teacher to confide in, but what could she say? That 3 students had asked her to meet them in a bathroom, that they wanted her to do homework for them. Without concrete threats or physical violence, Maya doubted any adult would take her seriously. As 6th period ended and students began streaming out of classrooms for the final dismissal of the day, Maya felt like a condemned prisoner walking toward the execution chamber. Her legs felt leaden as she climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. Each step bringing her closer to a confrontation she was utterly unprepared for. The bathroom by the old gym was exactly as deserted as Ashley had promised. The space smelled of industrial disinfectant and something vaguely moldy, with fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered intermittently. Maya pushed through the heavy door with trembling hands, her footsteps echoing off the tile walls as she entered what felt like a trap closing around her. Zoe Parker stood with her back against the row of sinks, her reflection multiplied in the mirror behind her like some nightmarish kaleidoscope. She had changed from her morning outfit into a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than Maya's father made in a week, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a high ponytail that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Right on time, Zoe said with satisfaction, her green eyes tracking Maya's movements like a cat watching a mouse. I appreciate punctuality. It shows respect. Connor and Ashley flanked the exit, effectively cutting off any chance of escape. Maya felt her breathing become shallow and rapid as the reality of her situation hit her with full force. She was trapped in a deserted bathroom with 3 people who clearly meant her harm, and no one in the world knew where she was. Let's get straight to the point, Zoe continued, pushing herself away from the sinks and taking a step toward Maya. You're new here, so maybe you don't understand how things work at Riverside High. Let me explain the social hierarchy for you. Maya pressed her back against the tile wall, her textbooks clutched against her chest like a shield. I don't want any trouble, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the echoing space. Zoe's laugh was sharp and humorless. Too late for that, Portland. You became trouble the moment you decided you were too good to help out your new classmates. See, at this school, there are people who matter and people who don't. People with connections and people without them. People who get protected and people who get taught lessons. Ashley stepped closer, her expensive perfume mixing with the bathroom's antiseptic smell in a way that made Maya's stomach lurch. Your little cop daddy might be hot stuff in Portland, but this is Cedar Falls. This is our territory. And in our territory, you follow our rules. Connor cracked his knuckles with deliberate menace, the sound echoing off the walls like breaking bones. Here's how it's going to work from now on. Every morning, you're going to check in with us before first period. We'll let you know what homework needs to be done, what assignments need to be completed. Consider it your contribution to the Riverside High community. Maya found her voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. And if I refuse? Zoe's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth that somehow looked predatory in the harsh fluorescent light. Then we make your life here very, very difficult. Anonymous tips to teachers about cheating. Rumors about your family that spread through social media like wildfire. Accidents that happen when teachers aren't looking. Trust me, Portland, we're very creative when it comes to making people understand their place. The casual cruelty in Zoe's voice was more terrifying than outright threats would have been. Maya realized she wasn't dealing with ordinary teenage bullies acting out of impulse or anger. These were calculating predators who had clearly done this before, who had refined their methods through practice on other victims. I need to think about it, Maya said desperately, hoping to buy herself time to figure out some kind of escape from the trap closing around her. Ashley stepped forward until she was close enough that Maya could see the individual flecks of mascara on her eyelashes. No more thinking time, Portland. You're going to agree right now, or we're going to give you a preview of what happens to girls who don't know their place. Maya's mind raced frantically, searching for some way out of the nightmare she had stumbled into. She thought about her father's training, about the self-defense moves he had taught her over the years. But 3 against 1 in an enclosed space with no weapons except textbooks seemed like impossible odds. What Maya didn't know was that at that exact moment, 30 miles away in the Cedar Falls Police Department Tactical Training Facility, Captain David Rodriguez was conducting a drill about rapid response to school emergencies. He was explaining to his team how quickly situations could escalate, how important it was to never underestimate the danger that students could face, even in environments that were supposed to be safe. The key, Captain Rodriguez told his officers as they prepared for a simulated hostage scenario, is understanding that predators always seek out isolated environments where their victims have no support, no witnesses, and no means of calling for help. Our job is to be ready to respond when someone's child needs us most. As if summoned by some cosmic irony, Captain Rodriguez's radio crackled to life with a routine call about suspicious activity reported near Riverside High School. Just teenagers hanging around after hours. Probably nothing serious. But something about the timing made him pause, made his trained instincts prick with unease. Meanwhile, in the second-floor bathroom, Maya Rodriguez stood against the tile wall and realized that her weekend of dread was about to become something much worse. Part 3. The fluorescent light above Maya's head flickered with increasing frequency, casting intermittent shadows across Zoe's face that made her expression seem to shift between human and something far more sinister. Maya's textbooks felt impossibly heavy in her arms, and she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears above the low hum of the building's ventilation system. You know what I think, Portland? Zoe said, beginning to pace in the small confines of the bathroom. Her designer sneakers squeaked against the damp tile with each step, creating a rhythm that felt ominous in the enclosed space. I think you're one of those girls who's been coddled her whole life. Daddy's little princess, who never learned that the world doesn't revolve around her. Connor positioned himself directly in front of the bathroom door, his broad shoulders effectively blocking Maya's only exit route. His varsity jacket bore patches from multiple sports, testament to his athletic prowess and the physical advantages he held over her much smaller frame. Maya estimated he outweighed her by at least 80 pounds, and his casual stance suggested he was completely confident in his ability to prevent any escape attempt. My family built this town, Connor said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than making threats. My grandfather started mills construction with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox. Now we employ half the people in Cedar Falls and donate more money to the school district than some entire communities see in their budgets." Ashley nodded in agreement, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the metal frame of the paper towel dispenser as she leaned against it. "The Wong family has been on the school board for 3 consecutive terms. My mother was the deciding vote on the bond measure that paid for the new computer lab and the renovated athletics facilities. We have what you might call invested interests in maintaining the proper social order around here." Maya struggled to process the casual way they discussed their family's influence, as if corruption and intimidation were simply business as usual in Cedar Falls. She thought about her father's stories from his early days in law enforcement, about the small-town politics and old-boy networks that could make an honest cop's job nearly impossible. "I understand that your families are important here," Maya said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "But that doesn't give you the right to force other students to do your homework. That's still cheating, no matter who your parents are." Zoe stopped pacing and turned to face Maya directly, her green eyes narrowing with what looked like genuine surprise. "Rights?" she repeated, as if Maya had just spoken in a foreign language. "You think this is about rights? Oh, Portland, you really don't understand how the world works, do you?" Ashley pushed herself away from the wall and took a step closer. To Maya, her movements predatory and calculated. "Let me explain something to you about rights. Rights are something that people with power give to people without power. And in this bathroom right now, we have all the power." Connor cracked his knuckles again, the sound echoing off the tile walls like snapping twigs. "Here's what's going to happen next. You're going to drop those books and get down on your knees. Then you're going to apologize for wasting our time with all this moral superiority nonsense. And then you're going to beg us to let you do our homework." Maya felt her throat constrict with terror as the true scope of their intentions became clear. This wasn't just about homework or academic favors. This was about complete domination, about breaking her spirit so thoroughly that she would never again consider standing up to them. "No," Maya said, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. It came out as barely more than a whisper, but in the confined space of the bathroom, it sounded like a shout of defiance. Zoe's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "No, did you? Just tell us no." She looked at Connor and Ashley with exaggerated shock. "I think Portland here needs a lesson in respect." Ashley reached into her designer purse and pulled out her smartphone, the expensive case glittering with embedded crystals that caught the harsh bathroom lighting. "Maybe we should document this for posterity. I bet the whole school would love to see a video of the cop's daughter learning her place." Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins as she realized they intended to humiliate her on camera, probably to share on social media where it would follow her for the rest of her high school career. She thought about her parents, about how devastated they would be to see their daughter degraded and mocked by strangers on the internet. "Please," Maya said, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please don't do this. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't record it." Zoe smiled with genuine pleasure at Maya's obvious terror. "Now you're starting to understand. But I'm afraid it's too late for easy solutions, Portland. You made us wait too long, made us work too hard to get your attention. Now we need to make sure you never forget this lesson." Connor stepped away from the door and moved toward Maya, his intentions clear in the predatory gleam of his eyes. "Don't worry, we'll start slow. Just a little shove to help you find your knees. Then maybe a few pictures for our personal collection. Nothing too dramatic. We're not monsters." Maya pressed herself harder against the tile wall, the cool surface seeping through her sweater and chilling her skin. Her mind raced frantically, searching for some way out of the nightmare closing around her. She thought about screaming, but the old gymnasium area was largely abandoned after school hours, and the thick walls would muffle any sound she made. "My father will find out," Maya said desperately, grasping for any threat that might give them pause. "He's a police officer. If you hurt me, he'll investigate. He'll arrest you." Ashley laughed, the sound sharp and mocking in the echoing bathroom. "Your daddy's a beat cop from Portland, sweetie. He has exactly zero jurisdiction here, and exactly zero influence with the Cedar Falls Police Department. In fact, I bet they're already getting tired of the new guy who thinks he knows better than everyone else." Zoe nodded in agreement, her smile widening with malicious satisfaction. "Besides, what's he going to investigate? 3 honor students having a private conversation with a new girl in a school bathroom. We're all here voluntarily, aren't we, Portland? Nobody forced you to come here." Maya realized with growing horror that they had planned this encounter with careful attention to legal details. There were no witnesses, no evidence of coercion, and no obvious crimes being committed. Even if she managed to report the incident, it would be her word against 3 students with impeccable reputations and powerful family connections. Connor took another step closer, and Maya could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the faint scent of sweat and adrenaline. "Time to stop talking and start listening," he said, reaching out toward her with one large hand. Maya closed her eyes and tried to summon every self-defense technique her father had ever taught her. Captain Rodriguez had always insisted that situational awareness and quick thinking were more important than physical strength, that even a smaller opponent could prevail with the right strategy and enough determination. But as Connor's fingers brushed against her arm, Maya felt her courage desert her completely. She was just a 17-year-old girl facing 3 larger, stronger opponents in an isolated location with no help coming. All of her father's training seemed inadequate in the face of such overwhelming odds. What Maya didn't know was that at that exact moment, Captain David Rodriguez was standing in the parking lot of Riverside High School, studying the building with the trained eye of a tactical expert. The suspicious activity call had turned out to be nothing more than a few students lingering after sports practice, but something about the empty school building bothered him. Captain Rodriguez had developed his instincts through 2 decades of law enforcement, and those instincts were telling him that something was wrong. The school seemed too quiet, too empty for a weekday afternoon. Most importantly, he hadn't seen Maya among the students walking home, which was unusual since she typically took the same route every day. "Probably nothing," he murmured to himself. But his hand instinctively moved to the radio clipped to his tactical vest. In his experience, probably nothing was often the prelude to definitely something, and his daughter's safety was not a risk he was willing to take. Back in the bathroom, Connor's hand closed around Maya's wrist with enough pressure to leave. Bruises. Maya gasped at the sudden pain, and her textbooks tumbled from her arms to scatter across the wet tile floor with a series of loud thuds that seemed to echo forever in the confined space. "There we go," Zoe said with satisfaction. "Now you're starting to get the picture. On your knees, Portland. Time for your first lesson in Cedar Falls social dynamics." Maya looked up into Connor's cold blue eyes and realized that this moment would define the rest of her high school experience. If she submitted now, if she allowed them to humiliate and dominate her, she would become their permanent victim. But if she continued to resist, the consequences might be even worse. In that moment of absolute terror and desperation, Maya made a decision that surprised everyone in the bathroom, including herself. Instead of dropping to her knees or trying to pull away from Connor's grip, she stepped forward and drove her knee upward with all the force she could muster. Captain Rodriguez had taught her that when facing larger opponents, the key was to target vulnerable areas with maximum impact. Connor's shocked expression as Maya's knee connected with his groin was almost comical, and his grip on her wrist loosened immediately as he doubled over in pain. Ashley screamed in surprise and dropped her phone, the expensive device clattering across the tile floor and coming to rest against the base of one of the toilet stalls. Zoe's mouth fell open in shock as Maya darted toward the door, her smaller size allowing her to slip past Connor's hunched form. But Maya's moment of triumph was short-lived. As she reached for the door handle, Zoe recovered from her surprise and lunged forward, grabbing a handful of Maya's dark hair and yanking her backward with vicious force. Maya cried out in pain as she was dragged away from the exit and thrown against the wall of sinks with enough force to rattle the mirrors. "You little witch," Zoe snarled, her carefully maintained facade of superiority cracking to reveal the vicious bully underneath. "You think you can attack my friends and just walk away? Nobody lays a hand on Connor Mills without consequences." Connor was slowly straightening up, his face flushed red with pain and embarrassment. "I'm going to make you regret that," he wheezed, his voice tight with suppressed agony. "Nobody humiliates me like that and gets away with it." Ashley had retrieved her phone and was checking it frantically for damage, her perfectly applied makeup smeared with tears of rage. "Do you have any idea how much this cost?" She screamed at Maya. "My parents are going to kill me if it's broken." Maya tasted blood in her mouth where her lip had split against the edge of the sink, and she could feel a bruise forming along her ribs where Zoe had slammed her into the wall. But despite the pain and the hopelessness of her situation, she felt a spark of pride having fought back, even if only for a moment. "My father taught me to defend myself," Maya said, spitting blood onto the tile floor. "He taught me that bullies only understand one language." Zoe's green eyes glittered with malicious intent as she grabbed Maya by the shoulders and shook her violently. "Your father isn't here, Portland. Nobody's coming to save you. And by the time we're done with you, you're going to wish you'd just done what we asked in the first place." Connor had recovered enough to move toward them again, his earlier charm completely replaced by cold fury. "Hold her still," he ordered Zoe. "I want to make sure she remembers this lesson for a very long time." Maya struggled against Zoe's grip, but the other girl was stronger than she looked and had the advantage of leverage. As Connor approached with obvious violent intent, Maya realized that her moment of defiance had only made things worse. Now, they weren't just planning to humiliate her. They intended to hurt her badly enough to ensure she never fought back again. "Please," Maya whispered one last time, but she could see in their faces that mercy was no longer an option. Whatever happened next would be limited only by how much damage they thought they could inflict without leaving evidence that would point back to them. Maya closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for whatever came next, her thoughts turning to her parents and the disappointment they would feel when they learned that their daughter had been too weak to protect herself. Captain Rodriguez had always told her that a true warrior never gives up, but Maya felt her strength and courage deserting her as Connor's shadow fell across her face. What none of them realized was that Captain David Rodriguez was at that moment climbing the stairs to the second floor of Riverside High School, his instincts screaming that his daughter was in danger somewhere in the building above him. Part 4. The reckoning begins. The sound of Connor's approaching footsteps echoed off the bathroom tiles like a death march, each step bringing him closer to Maya's hunched form against the wall of sinks. Zoe's grip on Maya's shoulders tightened, her perfectly manicured nails digging through the fabric of Maya's sweater hard enough to leave crescent-shaped marks on her skin. The fluorescent light above continued its erratic flickering, casting shifting shadows that made the small space feel like a nightmare given physical form. "You know what the best part about this is?" Zoe whispered into Maya's ear, her breath hot against Maya's skin. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to walk into school with bruises and cuts, and when people ask what happened, you're going to tell them you fell down some stairs. Because if you even think about telling the truth, we'll make what happens next look like a gentle massage." Ashley had finished inspecting her phone and apparently decided it was undamaged, because she began recording again with the casual indifference of someone documenting a mundane event. "Make sure you get her face when Connor starts," she instructed Zoe. I want to see the exact moment she realizes how powerless she really is. Maya felt hot tears streaming down her cheeks, mixing with the blood from her split lip to create pink droplets that fell onto her stained sweater. She thought about her parents at home, probably starting dinner preparations and wondering why she was running late. They had no idea that their daughter was trapped in a nightmare scenario that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Connor flexed his fingers experimentally, testing the range of motion in his hands, as if preparing for some athletic endeavor. The pain from Maya's knee strike had largely subsided, replaced by a cold fury that made his blue eyes look almost black in. The harsh bathroom lighting. "I've been thinking about what would hurt most," Connor said conversationally, as if discussing weekend plans rather than planning an assault. "Physical pain heals pretty quickly, especially at our age. But emotional trauma, psychological damage, that stuff stays with you forever." Maya's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she realized the true scope of their intentions. This wasn't just about establishing dominance or securing her compliance with their homework demands. This was about breaking her completely, about ensuring that she would never again consider herself worthy of standing up to them or anyone else. "Please," Maya whispered one final time, her voice so quiet it was barely audible above the building's ventilation system. "Please don't do this. I'll do anything you want. I'll never tell anyone. Just please don't hurt me." Zoe's laugh was sharp and cruel, like breaking glass in the confines of the small bathroom. "Oh, sweetie, you're definitely going to do anything we want." Captain David Rodriguez's tactical boots made no sound as he moved through the eerily quiet hallways of Riverside High School. 20 years of law enforcement had taught him to move with purpose while maintaining complete situational awareness, and every instinct he possessed was screaming that something was terribly wrong. The custodial staff had let him in after he'd shown his badge and explained his concern about checking on his daughter, but the building felt abandoned in a way that made his skin crawl. Maya's usual route home took her past the main entrance, and the fact that he hadn't seen her walking along Maple Street at her normal time had triggered every protective alarm in his system. Captain Rodriguez had learned long ago to trust his gut feelings, especially when they concerned the safety of his family. The same instincts that had kept him alive through countless dangerous situations were now telling him that Maya was somewhere in this building and that she was in serious trouble. The first floor had yielded nothing but empty classrooms and the lingering scent of teenage anxiety that seemed to permeate all educational institutions. The second floor felt different, charged with a tension that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Captain Rodriguez paused at the top of the stairs, his trained ears picking up sounds that didn't belong in an empty school building. Somewhere down the hallway, he could hear voices. Not the cheerful chatter of students cleaning up after activities, but something darker and more urgent. The voices were coming from the direction of the old gymnasium, an area of the school that had been largely abandoned since the new athletic facilities were constructed on the opposite side of the building. Captain Rodriguez moved toward the sounds with the careful precision of a predator stalking prey. His hand instinctively moved to his service weapon, though he hoped desperately that such measures wouldn't be necessary in a high school building. As he drew closer to the source of the voices, he began to make out individual words that made his blood run cold. "Hold her still." The voice was male, young, filled with a casual cruelty that Captain Rodriguez had encountered too many times in his career. "I want to make sure she remembers this lesson." The response was female, equally young but somehow more chilling in its calculated viciousness. "She's not going anywhere. Are you getting this on video? We want her to see exactly how helpless she looks." Captain Rodriguez felt his heart stop beating for a moment as he recognized the third voice, weak and terrified, but unmistakably belonging to his daughter. "Please don't do this. I'll never tell anyone. Just please don't hurt me." The sound of Maya's voice, broken and pleading, unleashed something primal in Captain Rodriguez's chest. The careful professional control that had defined his career evaporated in an instant, replaced by the pure protective fury of a father whose child was being threatened. His training kicked in automatically, assessing the situation and formulating a response plan even as rage clouded his vision. 3 perpetrators based on the voices. 1 victim who was his 17-year-old daughter. Unknown weapons or means of restraint. Confined space that would limit options for both sides. The tactical part of his mind cataloged these factors while the father in him fought the urge to charge through the door with guns blazing. Captain Rodriguez positioned himself outside the bathroom door, his ear pressed against the painted metal surface to gather more intelligence before acting. What he heard in the next few seconds would stay with him for the rest of his life, fueling nightmares and moments of pure rage that he would struggle to control. You know what I think would be really educational? The male voice again, now dripping with sadistic anticipation. I think Portland here needs to understand what happens to girls who think they're too good for their betters. Maybe we should help her practice some of the moves she needs to know for her new role as our personal servant. The female voice giggled with genuine amusement, as if torture and humiliation were the most entertaining activities imaginable. Oh, I love that idea. Make sure you get close-ups, Ashley. I want to post this where everyone can see what happens to stuck-up little princesses who don't know their place. Captain Rodriguez heard his daughter sob, a sound of pure despair that cut through his heart like a physical blade. In that moment, every rule of engagement, every regulation about appropriate force, every consideration about jurisdiction and proper procedure ceased to matter. There was only a father listening to his child being terrorized by predators who thought themselves untouchable. The bathroom door wasn't locked, a detail that probably saved the 3 students inside from injuries that would have required reconstructive surgery. Captain Rodriguez's entry was explosive and perfectly executed, the door slamming open with enough force to crack the tile wall behind it. His massive frame filled the doorway like an avenging angel, and the sight that greeted him confirmed his worst fears. Maya was pressed against the wall of sinks, her face streaked with tears and blood from a split lip. Her sweater was torn at the shoulder, and angry red marks on her throat suggested that someone had grabbed her by the neck. 3 teenagers stood around her like wolves circling wounded prey, their expensive clothes and privileged bearing doing nothing to disguise the predatory cruelty in their eyes. The boy, tall and athletic with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way, had his hand raised as if preparing to strike. One of the girls held a smartphone, obviously recording whatever degradation they had planned. The other girl maintained a grip on Maya's shoulders that was clearly painful, her perfectly manicured nails digging into Maya's skin hard enough to leave marks. The tableau held for perhaps 3 seconds, long enough for Captain Rodriguez to assess the threat level and formulate his response. Then training and paternal fury merged into a force of nature that none of the 3 students were prepared to face. Cedar Falls Police, Captain Rodriguez announced in a voice that could have shattered glass. Everyone step away from the girl immediately and place your hands where I can see them. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The girl with the phone dropped the device, which clattered across the tile floor and spun to a stop against the base of a toilet stall. The boy stumbled backward, his face draining of color as he took in the sight of a fully armed tactical officer, whose expression promised violence if his orders weren't followed immediately. Only the girl holding Maya seemed to retain any composure, though her grip on Maya's shoulders loosened considerably. "Officer, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," she began in a voice that dripped with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of talking her way out of consequences. Captain Rodriguez's eyes locked onto hers with the intensity of a laser sight acquiring a target. "The only misunderstanding here is your belief that you could assault my daughter and walk away without consequences." Release her now and step back against the wall." The word daughter hung in the air like a physical presence, and Captain Rodriguez could see the moment when all three students realized exactly how much trouble they were in. The girl's hands fell away from Maya as if she'd been burned, and she stumbled backward to join her companions against the far wall. Maya collapsed to her knees, her legs finally giving out under the weight of terror and relief. Captain Rodriguez wanted nothing more than to gather his daughter in his arms and carry her away from this nightmare, but his training demanded that he secure the scene first. The three students represented a clear and present danger that had to be neutralized before he could tend to the victim. "Hands on the wall, all of you," Captain Rodriguez ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had given similar commands to armed criminals and dangerous suspects. "Spread your feet and don't move unless I tell you to." The boy looked as if he wanted to protest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Captain Rodriguez fixed him with a stare that had made hardened gang members reconsider their life choices. "Son, I strongly advise you to comply with my instructions. You're already looking at multiple felony charges, and I'm barely controlling the urge to demonstrate what happens to people who hurt my family. Don't give me an excuse to lose that control." The three students assumed the position with varying degrees of coordination, their expensive clothes and privileged backgrounds offering no protection against the reality of facing a trained law enforcement officer who had caught them in the act of committing serious crimes. Captain Rodriguez keyed his radio with one hand while keeping his weapon trained on the suspects. "Dispatch, this is Captain Rodriguez requesting immediate backup at Riverside High School. Second floor bathroom near the old gymnasium. I have 3 suspects in custody for assault and battery, possible kidnapping, and intimidation of a minor. I also need paramedics for a teenage victim who may require medical attention." The dispatcher's voice crackled back with professional efficiency. "Copy, Captain Rodriguez. Units are en route, ETA 4 minutes. Do you need additional tactical support?" Captain Rodriguez glanced at the 3 teenagers pressed against the bathroom wall, noting their obvious terror and complete lack of fight. "Negative on tactical. Standard patrol units and medical will be sufficient. But make sure Detective Chun is notified. This is going to require careful handling given the ages of the suspects and the nature of the charges." Only when he was satisfied that the immediate threat had been neutralized did Captain Rodriguez holster his weapon and kneel beside his daughter. Maya looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of relief, embarrassment, and lingering terror that made his heart break. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the building's ventilation system. "I should have told you what was happening. I should have asked for help." Captain Rodriguez gathered his daughter into his arms, careful not to aggravate what appeared to be bruising along her ribs. "None of this is your fault, Mia. None of it. These people chose to be predators, and now they're going to face the consequences of that choice." He helped Maya to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed with delayed shock. The 3 students remained motionless against the wall, their earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of real authority and genuine consequences. "Officer, I think you should know that my father is going to be very upset about this," the blonde girl said, her voice carrying a note of desperation beneath the attempted arrogance. "He has significant influence in this community, and I'm sure this can all be worked out without involving the courts." Captain Rodriguez turned to look at her with an expression that could have frozen hellfire. "Your father's influence doesn't extend to assaulting police officers' children, young lady. And if he tries to interfere with this investigation, he'll find himself sharing a cell with you." The sound of approaching sirens echoed through the building, growing louder as multiple units responded to Captain Rodriguez's call for backup. Within minutes, the quiet bathroom would be transformed into a crime scene, complete with photographers, evidence technicians, and detectives who would methodically document every aspect of what had occurred. But for now, there was only a father holding his injured daughter while three privileged teenagers began to understand that actions have consequences, regardless of how much money their families possessed or how much influence they thought they wielded. Captain Rodriguez looked down at Maya's bruised face and made a silent promise that these three would face the full weight of the justice system. Money and connections might open doors in Cedar Falls, but they wouldn't close the ones that were about to slam shut on three young predators who had made the mistake of targeting the wrong victim. The cavalry was coming, and for the first time since entering the bathroom, Captain Rodriguez allowed himself a small smile. These kids were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between perceived power and real authority. Part 4. The revelation. The backup officers arrived with the efficiency that Captain Rodriguez had come to expect from professional law enforcement, their tactical boots echoing through the empty hallways of Riverside High School like a small army on the march. Detective Lisa Chun led the group, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who had investigated hundreds of crimes involving minors. Detective Chun was a compact woman in her early 40s, her black hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that revealed the small scar above her left eyebrow, where a suspect had connected with a lucky punch 3 years earlier. She wore a conservative navy suit that concealed the service weapon at her hip, and her expression remained carefully neutral as she entered the bathroom that had become a crime scene. "Captain Rodriguez," Detective Chun said with professional courtesy, though her eyes immediately moved to assess Maya's condition. "What do we have here?" Captain Rodriguez helped his daughter to her feet, his arm remaining protectively around her shoulders as he briefed the detective. 3 suspects, ages approximately 16 to 18, caught in the act of assaulting my daughter. Evidence of premeditation, including video recording of the assault. Victim shows signs of physical trauma consistent with battery and unlawful restraint. Detective Chun nodded, pulling out a small notebook to record the preliminary details. Her eyes moved to the 3 students still positioned against the wall, noting their expensive clothing and the obvious terror on their faces. In her experience, wealthy teenagers often believe themselves immune to consequences, making them particularly dangerous when their sense of entitlement was challenged. "Names and ages," Detective Chun ordered the 3 suspects, her voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. The blonde girl, who had clearly been the leader of the group, straightened slightly as if preparing to deliver a prepared speech. "I'm Zoe Parker, and I'm 17 years old. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here, Detective. We were just having a conversation with Maya about school activities. Things got a little heated, but nobody was seriously hurt." "Detective." Chun's expression didn't change, but Captain Rodriguez could see the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated she had encountered this type of deflection before. Wealthy defendants always had explanations that painted them as victims of circumstance rather than perpetrators of deliberate crimes. "Connor Mills, also 17, the boy said, his voice shaking slightly despite his obvious attempt to project confidence. "My family has significant ties to this community, Detective. I'm sure this can all be resolved without involving the courts." The 3rd girl, who had been holding the phone, seemed to be in a state of shock that prevented coherent speech. Detective Chun had to repeat her question twice before getting a response. "Ashley Wong, 16, the girl whispered, tears streaming down her face as the reality of her situation began to penetrate. "I didn't want to do this. They made me record it. I just wanted to be popular." Detective Chun made notes on each response, her expression remaining professionally neutral despite the obvious inconsistencies in their stories. She turned to Captain Rodriguez with a slight raise of her eyebrow. "I'll need to interview your daughter separately to get her version of events," Detective Chun said. "Standard procedure, and it will help ensure that any charges we file will stick in court." Captain Rodriguez nodded, understanding the necessity of proper protocol, even when every fiber of his being wanted to handle this situation through less official channels. Maya, Detective Chun needs to ask you some questions about what happened here. Just tell her the truth, exactly as it occurred. Maya looked up at her father with eyes that still held traces of the terror she had experienced, but also with a growing determination that reminded Captain Rodriguez of her mother's fierce spirit. I want to tell her everything, Dad. I want them to understand that what they did was wrong. Detective Chun led Maya to a quiet classroom down the hall while other officers processed the crime scene and transported the 3 suspects to the Cedar Falls Police Department for formal booking. The bathroom that had been a place of terror just minutes earlier was now swarming with evidence technicians who photographed every angle and collected samples that would be crucial in building a case against the perpetrators. Officer Mark Stevens, a veteran patrol officer with 15 years of experience, approached Captain Rodriguez with the kind of expression that suggested difficult news. "Captain, we found this," he said, holding up Ashley Wong's smartphone in an evidence bag. Preliminary review shows approximately 6 minutes of video documenting the assault. The audio is particularly damaging, clear evidence of premeditation and intent to cause psychological trauma. Captain Rodriguez felt his jaw clench as he imagined his daughter's terror being captured for the entertainment of her tormentors. How much of the incident did they record? Officer Stevens consulted his notebook, his expression grim. Based on the timestamps they started filming before you arrived. We have clear audio of threats, discussion of their plans to humiliate and physically assault the victim, and multiple statements indicating this was part of an ongoing pattern of intimidation. The implications of that last statement hit Captain Rodriguez like a physical blow. Ongoing pattern? You mean they've done this to other students? That's what it sounds like, sir. There are references to previous incidents and discussions about their methods for selecting and controlling victims. Detective Chun is going to want to expand this investigation to include potential additional victims. Captain Rodriguez ran a hand through his graying hair, his mind racing with the implications of what Officer Stevens was describing. If Zoe Parker and her accomplices had been systematically terrorizing other students, then Maya's assault was just the tip of a much larger iceberg of criminal behavior that had been hidden beneath the surface of Cedar Falls affluent high school. "Culture, sir," Officer Stevens prompted gently. "Are you all right?" Captain Rodriguez realized he had been staring at the bathroom door, lost in thoughts of what might have happened if his instincts hadn't driven him to check on Maya's whereabouts. "I'm fine, Stevens. Just thinking about how many other kids might have suffered through this same kind of abuse without anyone knowing." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Captain Rodriguez looked up to see a man in an expensive suit striding toward them with the kind of purposeful anger that suggested personal involvement. The newcomer was tall and imposing, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of getting his way through intimidation and financial influence. "Where is my son?" the man demanded without preamble, his voice carrying the kind of authority that was accustomed to immediate compliance. "I'm Richard Mills, and I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding involving my boy Connor." Officer Stevens stepped forward with professional courtesy, though his hand moved instinctively closer to his service weapon. "Mr. Mills, your son is being processed at the station on charges of assault and battery. If you'd like to speak with him, you'll need to contact the desk sergeant about visitation procedures." Richard Mills' face flushed red with indignation, and he turned his attention to Captain Rodriguez with the kind of look that suggested he was accustomed to intimidating public officials. "Captain, I think we can resolve this situation without involving the courts. Boys will be boys, and sometimes teenage drama gets blown out of proportion. I'm prepared to make a generous donation to the police department's equipment fund if we can handle this quietly." The offer hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Captain Rodriguez felt every muscle in his body tense with barely controlled Fury. In his 20 years of law enforcement, he had encountered corruption in many forms, but rarely had someone been brazen enough to attempt bribery directly in front of multiple witnesses. Mr. Mills, Captain Rodriguez said in a voice that could have frozen liquid nitrogen, your son was caught on camera assaulting my daughter in a coordinated attack with 2 accomplices. He's going to be charged with multiple felonies, and if you attempt to interfere with this investigation in any way, you'll join him in a cell. Richard Mills' expression shifted from confident arrogance to genuine shock as he realized that his usual methods of problem-solving weren't going to work in this situation. Your daughter? I had no idea. Captain, surely we can work something out. Connor has never been in trouble before. He's being recruited by several universities for football scholarships. Then he should have thought about that before he decided to become a predator, Captain Rodriguez replied coldly. Those scholarships are going to disappear when the universities learn about his criminal record. The sound of another set of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Captain Rodriguez turned to see a well-dressed woman approaching with the kind of urgent determination that suggested she had received very bad news. The woman was middle-aged and elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and jewelry that probably cost more than most people's cars. Excuse me, the woman said breathlessly. I'm Margaret Parker, Zoe's mother. I understand there's been some kind of incident involving my daughter. I need to see her immediately. Officer Stevens consulted his notebook again, his expression becoming more guarded. Mrs. Parker, your daughter is also being processed on assault charges. Like Mr. Mills. Here, you'll need to go through proper channels if you want to visit her. Margaret Parker's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the panic underneath. Assault charges? That's impossible. Zoe is an honor student, captain of the debate team. She would never hurt anyone. Captain Rodriguez looked at the 2 parents standing before him, both struggling to reconcile the children they thought they knew with the predators he had caught terrorizing his daughter. In his experience, parents were often the last to recognize the monsters their children had become, especially when wealth and privilege had shielded them from consequences their entire lives. Mrs. Parker, Mr. Mills, Captain Rodriguez said, with forced civility, your children participated in a coordinated assault on a minor that was captured on video. They showed premeditation, cruelty, and complete disregard for their victims' well-being. These aren't the actions of children making mistakes. They're the crimes of people who believe themselves above the law. Margaret Parker's composure crumbled completely, and she grabbed Captain Rodriguez's arm with desperate intensity. Please, Captain, there must be some misunderstanding. Zoe comes from a good family. We've given her every advantage, every opportunity. She couldn't possibly be involved in something like this. Captain Rodriguez gently removed her hand from his arm, his expression softening slightly in the face of a mother's genuine anguish. Ma'am, the evidence is overwhelming. Your daughter was the apparent ringleader of the group that assaulted my child. The video shows her directing the others and making explicit threats about future retaliation. The hallway fell silent except for the sound of Margaret Parker's quiet sobbing and the distant chatter of police radios. Richard Mills stood frozen in place. His earlier bluster completely evaporated as the reality of his son's situation began to sink in. Detective Chun emerged from the classroom where she had been interviewing Maya, her expression grim but satisfied. She approached Captain Rodriguez with the kind of look that suggested she had gathered significant evidence to support the charges. Captain, your daughter's testimony is consistent with the physical evidence and the video documentation. We have a solid case for multiple felony charges against all 3 suspects. I'm also recommending that we open a broader investigation into potential additional victims based on statements Maya heard during the assault. Captain Rodriguez felt a mixture of pride and sorrow as he thought about his daughter's courage in providing detailed testimony despite her trauma. Maya had inherited her parents' strength, and she was going to need every bit of it to get through the legal proceedings that lay ahead. "What's the next step?" Captain Rodriguez asked, though his years of experience had already given him a good idea of how the process would unfold. "The suspects will be held pending arraignment," Detective Chun replied. "Given the seriousness of the charges and the evidence of premeditation, I expect the district attorney will recommend that they be tried as adults. The video evidence alone is probably enough to secure convictions." Margaret Parker let out a wail of despair that echoed through the empty hallway, while Richard Mills seemed to age 10 years in the span of a few seconds. Both parents were beginning to understand that their children's privileged lives were about to change dramatically, and that no amount of money or influence would be able to undo the consequences of their actions. Captain Rodriguez looked down the hallway toward the classroom where Maya was finishing her interview, and he felt a fierce surge of pride in his daughter's resilience. She had faced down 3 predators who thought themselves untouchable, and she was going to help ensure that they faced justice for their crimes. The privileged bubble that had protected Zoe Parker, Connor Mills, and Ashley Wong their entire lives had finally burst, and they were about to learn that actions have consequences regardless of how much money their families possessed. Part 5. The aftermath. 3 weeks after the bathroom incident at Riverside High School, Maya Rodriguez sat in the passenger seat of her father's patrol car as they drove through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls toward the courthouse. The October morning was crisp and clear, with autumn leaves creating a carpet of gold and red along the sidewalks that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Maya had insisted on attending the arraignment hearing despite her parents' concerns about the emotional toll it might take. Captain Rodriguez understood his daughter's need to see the legal process through, but his protective instincts made him wish he could shield her from any additional trauma related to the assault. "You don't have to go in there if you change your mind," Captain Rodriguez said gently as they pulled into the courthouse parking lot. "Detective Chun can handle everything without your testimony today." Maya shook her head with determination that reminded him of her mother's stubborn streak. "I need to see this, Dad. I need to know that what they did has real consequences. Other kids at school are watching to see if the system actually works when it's their word against rich families." The courthouse was an imposing brick building that had served Cedar Falls for over 60 years, its classical columns and marble steps designed to project authority and permanence. As they climbed the steps together, Captain Rodriguez noticed the cluster of reporters who had gathered to cover what had become the most sensational criminal case in the town's recent history. The story had broken 3 days after the arrests, when someone at the police department had leaked details about the assault and the prominent families involved. The Cedar Falls Gazette had run a front-page story with the headline "Local Students Charged in Violent Assault," complete with school photos of the 3 defendants that made them look like the privileged teenagers they were rather than the predators Captain Rodriguez knew them to be. Maya kept her head down as they passed the reporters, ignoring their shouted questions about her experience and her family's plans for civil litigation. Captain Rodriguez had already made it clear that the family would not be making any public statements until after the criminal proceedings were concluded, but that hadn't stopped the media from speculating about every aspect of the case. Inside the courthouse, Detective Chen was waiting for them with Assistant District Attorney Sarah Mitchell, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who had built a reputation for successfully prosecuting difficult cases involving wealthy defendants. Ada Mitchell had reviewed the evidence thoroughly and concluded that the state had an excellent chance of securing convictions on all charges. "Maya, how are you holding up?" Detective Chun asked with genuine concern. "I know this process can be overwhelming, especially when there's so much media attention." Maya straightened her shoulders and met the detective's eyes with growing confidence. "I'm okay. Nervous, but okay. I want to see them face consequences for what they did to me, and probably other students too." Ada Mitchell nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right attitude. The evidence in this case is overwhelming, and your testimony has been crucial in building a strong prosecution. The defendants' families have hired expensive lawyers, but they can't argue with video evidence of their clients committing serious felonies. The courtroom was packed with spectators, including several students from Riverside High School who had come to support Maya and others who seemed more interested in watching their former classmates face justice. Captain Rodriguez recognized some of the faces as belonging to students who had probably suffered under Zoe Parker's reign of terror, but had been too frightened to speak out. Judge William Harrison presided over the arraignment with the kind of stern dignity that came from 30 years on the bench. He was known throughout the county as a fair but tough jurist who had little patience for legal theatrics or attempts to buy favorable treatment through family connections. Zoe Parker entered the courtroom flanked by 2 expensive lawyers who probably charged more per hour than most Cedar Falls residents made in a week. She wore a conservative navy dress that was obviously chosen to make her appear younger and more innocent, but Captain Rodriguez could see the calculating intelligence in her green eyes that had made her such an effective predator. Connor Mills followed with his own legal team, his face pale and drawn in a way that suggested he had lost considerable weight since his arrest. The confident athlete who had terrorized Maya in the bathroom had been replaced by a frightened teenager who was beginning to understand the magnitude of his situation. Ashley Wong appeared to be in the worst condition of the 3, her face streaked with tears and her hands shaking visibly as she took her place at the defendant's table. Her parents sat in the front row behind her, their expressions mixing shame and disbelief in equal measure. Judge Harrison called the court to order with a sharp rap of his gavel, and the formal proceedings began with the reading of charges against each defendant. The list was extensive and damning: assault and battery, unlawful restraint, intimidation of a witness, conspiracy to commit assault, and violation of privacy statutes related to the unauthorized recording. How do the defendants plead? Judge Harrison asked once the charges had been read in full. Zoe Parker's lead attorney, a silver-haired man who radiated expensive competence, stood to address the court. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges. We believe the evidence will show that this was a misunderstanding between teenagers that has been blown out of proportion by overzealous law enforcement. Connor Mills' lawyer entered a similar plea, though his delivery lacked the confidence of Zoe's representation. Ashley Wong's attorney, a younger woman who seemed overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, entered a plea of not guilty while requesting that her client be evaluated for mental health counseling. Judge Harrison made notes on each plea before addressing the question of bail. A.D. Mitchell had filed a motion requesting that bail be set high enough to ensure the defendant's appearance at trial, given their family's financial resources and potential flight risk. Your Honor, A.D. Mitchell argued, these defendants showed clear premeditation in their assault on the victim. They selected an isolated location, brought recording equipment, and discussed their plans to intimidate future victims. The evidence suggests this was part of an ongoing pattern of criminal behavior that poses a continuing threat to other students. Zoe Parker's attorney rose to object strenuously to what he characterized as inflammatory rhetoric designed to prejudice the court against his client. Your Honor, Miss Parker is an honor student with no prior criminal record who has strong ties to the community. She poses no flight risk and should be released on her own recognizance. Judge Harrison listened to arguments from all sides before setting bail at $50,000 for each defendant, amount that was substantial, enough to demonstrate the seriousness of the charges while remaining within reach of their wealthy families. The defendants would be required to surrender their passports and agree to have no contact with the victim or potential witnesses. As the defendants were processed for release, Captain Rodriguez watched their parents struggling to come to terms with the new reality their families faced. Margaret Parker looked as if she had aged 10 years since the arrest, while Richard Mills maintained a facade of angry determination that fooled no one in the courtroom. Maya sat beside her father throughout the proceedings, her posture straight and her expression focused, despite the emotional toll of seeing her attackers again. Captain Rodriguez felt immense pride in his daughter's courage and resilience qualities. That would serve her well in the difficult months ahead. After the hearing concluded, Ada Mitchell approached the Rodriguez family with an update on the expanding investigation. "We've identified at least 4 other potential victims who may have been targeted by this group," she informed them quietly. "Detective Chun is working with the school administration to encourage other students to come forward." Maya's eyes widened with a mixture of vindication and sorrow. "I knew they had done this before. The way they talked, the way they had everything planned out, it wasn't their first time." Detective Chun nodded grimly. "We're building a case that shows a pattern of predatory behavior spanning at least 2 years. If we can get testimony from other victims, we can pursue additional charges that could result in significant prison time for all 3 defendants." As they left the courthouse, Captain Rodriguez noticed that several of his colleagues from the Cedar Falls Police Department had gathered to show their support. The thin blue line extended beyond professional obligations when one of their own was threatened, and Maya's assault had been taken personally by every officer in the department. The media attention continued as they walked to their car, but Captain Rodriguez noted with satisfaction that the tone of the coverage had shifted dramatically since the arraignment. What had initially been portrayed as a dispute between teenagers was now being recognized as a serious criminal case involving systematic predation and abuse of power. That evening, as the Rodriguez family sat around their dinner table for the first time in weeks without the specter of legal uncertainty hanging over them, Maya finally began to open up about her experience and its aftermath. "I've been thinking a lot about what Ashley said in the bathroom," Maya told her parents as they shared Carmen's famous enchiladas, "about how she just wanted to be popular. I think maybe she was a victim too, in a different way." Captain Rodriguez set down his fork and studied his daughter's face, noting the maturity and compassion that had emerged from her traumatic experience. "What do you mean, Mia?" "I think Zoe and Connor were bullies who enjoyed hurting people," Maya explained thoughtfully. "But Ashley seemed scared of them too. Like maybe she got pulled into their group because she was afraid of being their target instead." Carmen reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "That's very insightful, Maya. It doesn't excuse what she did to you, but it shows that you're trying to understand rather than just seek revenge." Maya nodded, her dark eyes reflecting a wisdom that came from surviving something that should never happen to any teenager. "I want them to face consequences for what they did. But I also want other kids to know that they don't have to be victims or perpetrators. There are other choices." Captain Rodriguez felt his chest swell with pride at his daughter's words. Maya had not only survived her ordeal, but had grown from it in ways that would make her a stronger, more compassionate person for the rest of her life. The predators who had tried to break her spirit had instead forged it into something unbreakable. The legal proceedings would continue for months, with trials and sentencing still ahead. But in that moment, sharing dinner with his family in their modest home in Cedar Falls, Captain Rodriguez knew that they had already won the most important victory. Maya had refused to be broken by her attackers, and her courage would inspire other victims to find their own voices. The privileged bullies who had thought themselves untouchable were about to learn that justice doesn't care about family wealth or social connections. And Maya Rodriguez, the quiet girl who had been dragged into a bathroom and terrorized, was going to help make sure they never hurt anyone else again. 6 months after the courthouse arraignment, Maya Rodriguez walked through the halls of Riverside High School with a confidence that would have been unimaginable during her first terrifying weeks as a transfer student. The same corridors that had once felt like a maze of potential threats now buzzed with a different kind of energy, one where students moved freely without the constant fear of predatory harassment that had defined the previous social order. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. In the weeks following the arrests of Zoe Parker, Connor Mills, and Ashley Wong, Riverside High had undergone what Principal Hayes described as a cultural reckoning. Students who had suffered in silence for years finally found the courage to speak out, creating a cascade effect that revealed the true scope of the intimidation and abuse that had been normalized under the previous regime. Maya's locker had become an unofficial shrine of sorts, decorated with notes of gratitude from students she had never met, but whose lives had been changed by her decision to stand up to her attackers. Cards and small gifts appeared regularly, left by classmates who wanted to express their appreciation for her courage, but were too shy to approach her directly. "Another one," said Jordan Thompson, who had become Maya's closest friend and confidant in the months since the incident. Jordan held up a hand-drawn card featuring a cartoon superhero with Maya's face, complete with a cape and the words, "Thank you for saving us all," written in careful block letters. Maya smiled as she took the card, though she still felt uncomfortable with the hero worship that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. "I just defended myself, Jordan. I'm not some kind of crusader for justice." Jordan laughed and shook her head with the kind of fond exasperation that comes from having the same conversation multiple times. "Maya, you literally exposed a criminal conspiracy that had been terrorizing students for years. Half the junior class was doing homework for those 3 psychopaths out of pure fear. The other half was walking on eggshells trying not to become their next targets." The statistics that had emerged during the expanded investigation were staggering. Detective Chun had ultimately identified 17 different students who had been victimized by Zoe Parker's network over a period of nearly 3 years. The crimes ranged from academic extortion to physical assault, with a sophisticated system of intimidation that had kept victims silent through a combination of shame, fear, and social isolation. Maya placed the new card carefully in her locker, alongside the dozens of others she had received, each one representing a life that had been touched by her decision to refuse submission to her attackers. The weight of that responsibility still felt overwhelming at times, but she had learned to channel those feelings into positive action rather than letting them paralyze her with anxiety. "Speaking of which," Jordan continued, "Mrs. Santos wants to know if you're still planning to speak at the assembly next week. She said the school board is really excited about having you address the incoming freshman class about standing up to bullying." Maya closed her locker and shouldered her backpack, considering the request that had been weighing on her mind for several days. Public speaking had never been her strength, and the idea of standing in front of hundreds of students to discuss the most traumatic experience of her life felt daunting. But she also understood the importance of sharing her story with students who might be facing similar situations. "I think I want to do it," Maya said finally. "Not for me, but for kids who might be going through what I went through. If hearing about my experience helps even one person find the courage to ask for help, then it's worth the discomfort." Jordan nodded approvingly as they walked toward their first period, English class. Mrs. Santos had become one of Maya's strongest supporters in the aftermath of the incident, offering not just academic guidance but emotional support as Maya navigated the complex feelings that came with surviving a traumatic experience. The classroom felt different now, filled with an energy that spoke to genuine learning rather than the undercurrent of fear that had previously characterized much of the school's academic environment. Students participated more freely in discussions, no longer worried that their opinions might somehow mark them as targets for retaliation from the ruling clique. "Good morning, Maya," Mrs. Santos said warmly as Maya took her seat. "I wanted to let you know that we've received confirmation from the district about the new anti-bullying protocols. Your input on the reporting procedures was particularly valuable." Maya felt a flush of pride at the recognition. In the months since the bathroom incident, she had worked closely with school administrators and district officials to develop new policies that would make it easier for students to report harassment. and ensure that complaints were taken seriously regardless of the social status of those involved. The new protocols included anonymous reporting options, mandatory training for all staff members on recognizing signs of systematic bullying, and clear consequences for students who used their family's influence to escape accountability for their actions. Most importantly, the policies established support systems for victims that went beyond simply punishing perpetrators. As the morning progressed, Maya found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed since that terrifying afternoon in the bathroom. The shy, frightened girl who had tried desperately to remain invisible had evolved into someone who spoke confidently in class discussions and wasn't afraid to challenge ideas she disagreed with. The legal proceedings had finally concluded the previous month with plea agreements that sent all three of her attackers to juvenile detention facilities for varying lengths of time. Zoe Parker, identified as the ringleader, had received the harshest sentence, 2 years in a secure facility followed by extensive community service and mandatory counseling. Kana Mills and Ashley Wong had received shorter sentences but would carry felony records that would impact their future educational and career opportunities. Maya had been present for the sentencing hearing, watching as Judge Harrison delivered his verdict with the kind of stern disapproval that made it clear he took crimes against children very seriously. The moment had brought closure to a chapter of her life that had been defined by fear and uncertainty, allowing her to finally move forward without constantly looking over her shoulder. "Maya, could you stay after class for a moment?" Mrs. Santos asked as the bell rang to signal the end of first period. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you privately." Maya gathered her books and approached the teacher's desk, noting the excited expression on Mrs. Santos' face that suggested good news rather than any kind of problem. "I received a call yesterday from the state education department," Mrs. Santos began, her voice filled with barely contained enthusiasm. "They want to invite you to participate in the statewide conference on school safety. Your story has become something of a case study in how proper law enforcement response can break cycles of institutional bullying." Maya felt her stomach flutter with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The idea of sharing her experience on such a large scale was intimidating, but she had come to understand that her story had power beyond her personal healing. Other students in other schools were facing similar situations, and her experience might provide them with hope and practical guidance. "Would I have to speak in front of a lot of people?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Mrs. Santos nodded sympathetically, understanding Maya's continued discomfort with public attention. "It would be a significant audience, probably several hundred educators and administrators from across the state. But they would also provide support to help you prepare, and you wouldn't be speaking alone. They want to include other students who have overcome similar challenges." Maya considered the opportunity, weighing her personal discomfort against the potential impact of sharing her story with people who had the power to implement changes in schools throughout the state. The thought of other students suffering in silence while their schools ignored systematic bullying made her decision easier. "I'll do it," Maya said firmly. "When is the conference?" "Not until next spring, so you'll have plenty of time to prepare." "And Maya," Mrs. Santos paused, her expression becoming more serious, "I want you to know how proud I am of the young woman you've become. What you've accomplished takes a special kind of courage that most adults never develop." Maya left the classroom feeling lighter than she had in months, buoyed by the recognition that her traumatic experience had been transformed into something that could help others. The girl who had once been terrified of drawing attention to herself was now actively seeking opportunities to use her voice for positive change. Lunch period brought its own set of transformations. The cafeteria that had once been divided into rigid social hierarchies now buzzed with more fluid interactions between different groups of students. Maya sat with Jordan and several other friends they had accumulated over the months, including 2 students who had been among Zoe Parker's victims and had found the courage to testify during the legal proceedings. "Did you guys see the article in the county newspaper?" asked Marcus Williams, a sophomore who had been forced to write essays for Connor Mills under threat of physical violence. "They're calling our school a model for how to handle bullying cases. Apparently, other districts are studying what happened here." Sarah Chun, a junior who had been systematically excluded from social activities by Ashley Wong's manipulation, looked up from her sandwich with interest. "My mom showed me that article. It mentioned Maya by name as an example of how one person's courage can change an entire institution." Maya shifted uncomfortably under the praise, still struggling with the hero narrative that others seemed determined to attach to her actions. "I just defended myself. Everyone else did the hard work of coming forward and testifying." Jordan laughed and nudged Maya's shoulder affectionately. "There she goes again, being modest about literally changing the culture of our entire school. Maya, you're going to have to accept that what you did was extraordinary." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a younger student Maya didn't recognize. A girl who looked to be about 14 with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was working up courage for something difficult. "Excuse me," the girl said hesitantly. "Are you Maya Rodriguez?" Maya nodded, noting the way the girl's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Yes, I am. What's your name?" "I'm Emma Patterson," the girl replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a freshman, and I wanted to thank you for what you did. My older sister graduated 2 years ago, and she told me about how bad things used to be here. She said I was lucky to be starting after you changed everything." Maya felt her throat tighten with emotion as she looked into Emma's earnest young face. This was exactly why her story mattered, not for the recognition or the praise, but for the kids who would never have to experience the fear and isolation that had defined her first weeks at Riverside High. "Thank you for telling me that, Emma," Maya said gently. "But remember, if anyone ever makes you feel unsafe or tries to intimidate you, there are people here who will listen and help. You don't have to handle anything alone." Emma nodded eagerly, clearly taking the advice to heart. "Mrs. Santos told us about the new reporting system in our orientation. She said students helped design it to make sure it actually works." After Emma left to rejoin her friends, Maya sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the ripple effects of her decision to fight back against her attackers. The changes at Riverside High went far beyond new policies and procedures. They represented a fundamental shift in how students related to each other and to the adults who were supposed to protect them. The afternoon brought Maya's favorite class, Advanced Biology with Mr. Hendricks, a young teacher who had arrived at Riverside High the same year as Maya and had quickly become known for his innovative teaching methods and genuine care for his students' welfare. The classroom was set up for a lab experiment on genetic inheritance, and Maya found herself partnered with David Kim, a quiet senior who had also been one of Zoe Parker's victims. "I heard you're speaking at that state conference," David said as they prepared their microscope slides. "That's really cool. I could never do something like that." Maya adjusted the microscope focus, remembering how she would have said exactly the same thing 6 months earlier. "I couldn't have done it either, back then. I think sometimes we discover strengths we didn't know we had when we're forced into situations that demand them." David nodded thoughtfully as he recorded data in his lab notebook. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About how scared I was for so long, and how that fear kept me from being who I really wanted to be. It's weird to say this, but in some ways, going through all that made me stronger." Maya understood exactly what David meant. The trauma of her assault had been horrible, but the process of surviving it and seeking justice had revealed reserves of courage and determination she had never known she possessed. The experience had fundamentally changed her understanding of her own capabilities and her place in the world. "Have you thought about what you want to do after graduation?" Maya asked as they waited for their samples to culture. David's expression brightened with excitement. Actually, yeah. I want to study psychology and maybe become a counselor who works with kids who've been bullied. I think having gone through it myself might help me understand what they're dealing with. Maya felt a surge of admiration for David's ability to transform his painful experience into a calling that could help others. It was exactly the kind of positive change that she hoped her own story might inspire. Victims becoming advocates, survivors becoming healers. The final bell of the day rang with its usual electronic urgency, but Maya no longer felt the relief that had once accompanied the end of the school day. Riverside High had become a place where she felt safe and valued, surrounded by friends and adults who respected her intelligence and appreciated her contributions to the school community. As she walked toward her locker to collect her books for homework, Maya noticed a commotion near the main entrance. A group of students had gathered around someone who appeared to be in distress, and Maya's protective instincts kicked in immediately. She pushed through the crowd to find a young boy, probably a 7th grader from the middle school that shared the campus, crying quietly while an older student attempted to comfort him. Maya recognized the signs immediately: the shame, the fear, the desperate hope that someone might help, but terror that speaking up would only make things worse. "What's going on?" Maya asked the older student, a girl she recognized from her chemistry class. "This is Tommy," the girl explained. "He says some 8th graders have been taking his lunch money and threatening to hurt him if he tells anyone. I found him hiding in the bathroom because he was afraid to go to his bus." Maya knelt down to Tommy's eye level, her heart breaking at the fear in his young face. She remembered exactly how he felt: the isolation, the helplessness, the desperate wish that someone stronger would intervene on his behalf. "Tommy, my name is Maya," she said gently. "I want you to know that what's happening to you isn't okay, and it's not your fault. There are adults here who can help you, and they will take this seriously." Tommy looked up at her with eyes that held a mixture of hope and skepticism. "But what if they don't believe me? What if the kids who are doing this find out I told on them?" Maya felt a fierce surge of protective anger on Tommy's behalf, remembering her own fears about reporting her attackers. "Tommy, I'm going to walk with you to the principal's office right now. Mr. Hayes is a good man who cares about keeping students safe. And I promise you that if anyone tries to retaliate against you for telling the truth, there are people here who will make sure they face consequences." As they walked toward the administrative offices, Maya reflected on how her experience had not only changed her own life, but had given her the tools and motivation to help other students facing similar challenges. The shy, frightened girl who had once been dragged into a bathroom was now someone other victims could turn to for support and guidance. Principal Hayes listened carefully to Tommy's story, taking detailed notes and asking gentle questions that helped the boy provide specific information about his tormentors. Maya sat beside Tommy throughout the interview, offering silent support and occasional encouragement when his courage flagged. "Tommy, I want you to know that we take bullying very seriously at this school," Principal Hayes said when the boy finished his account. "We have new procedures now that make it much easier for us to investigate these situations and ensure that victims are protected. You did exactly the right thing by coming forward." As they left the principal's office, Tommy turned to Maya with an expression of gratitude that reminded her why her own ordeal had ultimately been worth surviving. "Thank you for helping me," Tommy said quietly. "I was so scared that nobody would care." Maya squeezed the boy's shoulder gently, remembering how desperately she had needed someone to show her that same kind of support during her darkest moments. "Tommy, there are always people who care. Sometimes it just takes courage to find them and ask for help." That evening, as Maya sat at her family's dinner table sharing the events of her day with her parents, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal recognition or achievement. She had used her voice and her experience to help another student find safety and support, continuing the cycle of positive change that had begun with her own decision to fight back against her attackers. Captain Rodriguez listened to his daughter's account of helping Tommy with the kind of pride that made his chest swell with emotion. The frightened girl he had found in that bathroom 6 months earlier had become a young woman who actively sought opportunities to protect and support others facing similar challenges. "You know what this means, don't you, Mia?" Captain Rodriguez said as Carmen served her famous flan for dessert. "You've become exactly the kind of person you needed when you were going through your own crisis. That's the most powerful kind of healing there is." Maya nodded, understanding that her father was right, but also knowing that her journey was far from over. There would be more Tommies who needed support, more schools that needed cultural change, more communities that needed to understand that systematic bullying was not a normal part of growing up, but a serious problem that required serious solutions. As she helped her mother clear the dinner dishes, Maya thought about the state conference where she would share her story with hundreds of educators. The girl who had once been terrified of speaking up in class was now preparing to address a room full of adults who had the power to implement changes that could protect thousands of students. The transformation was remarkable, but Maya understood that it hadn't happened overnight or without cost. She still had nightmares sometimes about that afternoon in the bathroom. She still felt moments of anxiety when she found herself in confined spaces with people she didn't know well. The trauma of her assault would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her identity or limited her possibilities. Later that evening, as Maya worked on homework in her bedroom, she received a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, her old fears resurfaced as she worried that one of her attackers might somehow be trying to contact her from detention. But when she opened the message, she found something entirely different. "Hi Maya, this is Emma from lunch today. I just wanted to say thank you again for what you said about asking for help. I used the new reporting system this afternoon to tell a counselor about something that's been bothering me, and she was really helpful. I probably wouldn't have had the courage to do it if I hadn't talked to you. Thank you for showing all of us that we can be brave." Maya read the message 3 times, each reading filling her with a deeper sense of purpose and satisfaction than any academic achievement or personal recognition could provide. Emma's courage to seek help when she needed it was exactly the kind of change Maya had hoped her story might inspire. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Maya thought about all the students like Tommy and Emma who were finding their voices and learning to advocate for themselves. The culture of fear and intimidation that had once defined Riverside High School was being replaced by something better, a community where students looked out for each other and adults took their responsibility to protect children seriously. The shy girl who had been dragged into a bathroom 6 months earlier was gone, replaced by a young woman who understood that true strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. Maya Rodriguez had discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silent when someone tries to make you a victim. And tomorrow, she would continue using that power to make sure no other student had to face their bullies alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.